All right, welcome to the FITSNews Week in Review. A huge Murdaugh week, people. We knew last week it was coming. It hit this week. A flurry of motions related to the double homicide case at the heart of this story. We are going to dig into every aspect of that, including analysis of the big court hearing in Florence County, South Carolina. We've got our research director, Jen Wood, who has been the #1 source on all things Murdaugh from the very beginning. She's in the studio with us. We're going to dive into everything from that hearing. We're also going to dig into a little bit on the Murdaugh finances, particularly an answer to the question of how he's been paying these high-profile, high-priced attorneys. Stay tuned for all that and much more on this edition of the Week in Review. All right, so as we went to tape with last week's edition of the Week in Review, a metric ton of news was breaking in the Murdaugh murders, crime, and corruption saga, particularly a filing from defense attorneys for Alex Murdaugh, the man at the center of this Category 5 storm, this maze of alleged criminality. They filed a motion addressing another individual who they allege was at the heart of the double homicide, which, again, lies at the very center of this still unfolding maze of multifaceted, multi-layered criminality. Now, according to defense attorneys Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin, cousin Eddie Smith, Curtis Eddie Smith, Alex Murdaugh's longtime friend, a guy who called Murdaugh a brother, a best friend. According to those defense attorneys, he failed a polygraph exam related to his knowledge of and potential participation in the double homicide at the heart of this, again, crazy story. But what we found out after that, this week, a flurry of motions from the defense, including one which challenged the state to present a timeline for when these murders took place. And folks, the state responded with a vengeance. During a hearing in Florence County, South Carolina, before Judge Clifton Newman, State Prosecutor Creighton Waters, the lead attorney in this case, laid out some new details that we had never heard before related to this crime. Our research director, Jen Wood, she joined us at that hearing. Jen's joining us in the studio today. We're going to talk about this hearing. Jen, let me ask you this. The timeline that was laid out by prosecutors in response to the defense attorneys, was that the biggest news from the hearing this week in the Murdaugh case?
I think that was a real big deal. It's the first time we've heard the state lay out times for the night of the homicides.
Well, let's walk them through those times. 8:44 p.m. We've got video evidence. Paul Murdaugh, a convivial family.
Convivial family discussion. Everybody was happy at 8:44.
Laughing, joking. Mm-hmm. Everybody's happy at 8:44 p.m. All's well in Murdaugh world.
Right.
9:06 p.m. What happened?
9:06 p.m. is when Alex left Moselle and allegedly went to, according to the state, his Almeda. They said Almeda. They didn't say where in Almeda.
Almeda, which is where his father,
right,
the former solicitor Randolph Murdaugh III, lived. Obviously, he was in poor health. Mm-hmm. Alex Murdaugh claimed that was where he was the whole evening originally.
Correct.
Then that alibi got blown out of the water. But let's walk through this timeline because obviously he leaves 9:06 p.m., but we know he's back
at Moselle at 10:07 to make the 911 call.
The famous 911 call in which he, there's blood everywhere.
Right.
It's bad.
It's a house.
Yep. It's a house. Yes, the 911 dispatcher asked him if it was a mobile home, and he was indignant. But let's rewind this tape because, again, we've got a very narrow frame here between 9:06 p.m., which is when prosecutors now say he left Moselle. Mm-hmm. That's new information. We didn't know that. Also new information is where he went when he left, which is how far away from the crime scene?
It was a 20-minute drive in the best of conditions, doing the speed limit.
Okay, so, 15 to 20 minutes.
Correct.
So that's obviously 15 to 20 minutes travel time there, 15 to 20 minutes of travel time back. That doesn't leave him very long.
1 hour and 1 minute, which would have left him 20 to 30 minutes, depending on.
Half an hour max.
Yeah.
So the new information we got this week was not only the time of departure, the initial departure from the crime scene, but a time of return, and most importantly, a destination in between, all of which we didn't know before.
All brand new information.
And all of which we only know because defense attorneys kind of pushed the envelope here.
Right, and the state responded.
With a vengeance, as I mentioned.
Sure did.
So this new timeline, let's walk through it because we've received information, and Jen, I know you've got the best sources on the Murdaugh story of anybody. Nobody's got your network on this story. What are your sources telling you about what happened during that 20 to 30 minutes that Alec Murdaugh was at Almeda?
There is an eyewitness that saw him during that time period.
Wait, let's say that again.
An eyewitness.
So in addition to now having a timeline of what Alec Murdaugh allegedly did in the immediate aftermath of the murders, we have a witness?
Yes.
I know you don't want to say too much about that witness at this point. That's correct?
Correct.
You want to keep these cards close to the vest. We don't want to compromise an
Right.
active, ongoing investigation, because this investigation is still ongoing, people.
Right.
But let's talk about what this witness purportedly saw. Can we say anything about that?
I know that they saw Alex at his parents' house carrying things to the backyard. That's what I was told.
Wow. Carrying things to the backyard. So an eyewitness sees him moments after these murders were allegedly committed, moments before he calls 911 after purportedly discovering the bodies of his wife and younger
Right.
son. He's seen in the backyard with some stuff. We'll leave it at that for now, right? We've got some more information that we're hoping to share on this in the not too distant future, but again, working with our law enforcement sources, our prosecutorial sources, other sources close to this case so that we don't compromise anything.
So he has 20 to 30 minutes at his parents' house. And we also know that there was recently a sled search of a swampy area just down the road from there.
That's right. August 30th, the high-profile search of the Coosawhatchie River.
Correct.
Down there near Almeda, 2.4 miles south.
Yep.
I think that's what one of your amazing Google Maps showed us. You've mapped out pretty much.
I have a lot. That's how I track everything. It works.
As you're a visual learner.
I am. But, it works well.
It does. It's been amazing to follow this case through some of those maps. And that covers that search again. Did they find anything?
Reportedly, no. It was unsuccessful.
Unsuccessful search. But they're zeroing in on something.
There's a reason that they're looking for.
And I want to bring us back to the hearing because, again, the whole focal point of this hearing, the reason for this hearing, was this bombshell claim that Curtis Eddie Smith failed a polygraph and that a response to a polygraph question indicated deception about whether or not he killed Maggie and Paul, whether or not he was there when Maggie and Paul died. This was a huge deal. In fact, there was a little...
picture of the...
A picture of the polygraph.
Yeah, of him taking the polygraph and the polygraph where it spiked, allegedly.
Which, according to Harpootlian and Griffin, indicated...
Deception.
Correct. Now, the day before this hearing in Florence, prosecutors in the Office of Attorney General Alan Wilson responded to this motion, and they disputed the defense's characterization of that polygraph. Tell us a little bit about what they had to say about it.
When reading through it, sounded like that was not at all what they came out of the polygraph investigation.
They said it could have been a
Right.
movement or...
Right. Could have been a movement, could have been anything, any physical reaction. When you're taking a polygraph, you're strapped up to heart rate monitors, blood pressure monitor, all of that stuff they're monitoring all that, looking for indications that you're lying. And movement can change that.
Can lead to a spike.
Correct.
And in fact, the prosecution specifically said that's not a deception spike, that's a
Right.
motion spike.
And polygraphs aren't typically admissible in court anyway. It's used for an investigation tool to help direct investigators in which way they want to look for evidence, but it's not really something that would be admissible.
Yeah, it wouldn't be admissible in
Right.
this case. In South Carolina, they are inadmissible
So,
in these criminal cases. Let's talk briefly, and I've got a clip here I want to cut to, and I want to get your thoughts on this clip because we spoke after the hearing with the attorney for Curtis Eddie Smith, Amy Zimmercheck, and we spoke with her about the allegations against her client, and we spoke with her about the polygraph. So let's take a quick cut to that interview with Amy Zimmercheck. All right, we're standing outside courtroom 3B here in Florence County, South Carolina, following a contentious hearing between prosecutors and defense attorneys in the Murdaugh murders double homicide case, the case at the very center of this ongoing crime and corruption saga. The bombshell hearing that led to this, although you're going to tell me in a minute, Amy, it wasn't quite a bombshell, but we'll get to that in a sec, related to Curtis Eddie Smith, Murdaugh's check casher, accused drug dealer, who defense attorneys have strongly implied had something to do with the double homicide. Now, Amy Zimmercheck, you are Curtis Eddie Smith's attorney. That's correct?
I am.
Now, let's first, before we talk about this here, and walk us back to Friday when you first saw the defense motion, which clearly implicated your client in connection with this double homicide. What did you think when you saw that motion?
Well, I thought it was highly improper. There is a protective order in place for a reason to keep inadmissible, improper evidence out of the public eye, because that can sway someone's opinion of truth-telling or not truth-telling, and that was the whole purpose of the filing of that motion.
Was to try and cast the blame away from Alec Murdaugh and onto your client.
Absolutely.
Now let's talk about that polygraph, though, at the heart of that filing. It was alleged by the defense attorneys for Mr. Murdaugh that your client, in answering questions related to his potential knowledge of and potential involvement in that double homicide, that responses indicated deception. Now walk us through your take on this polygraph.
First of all, that's not at all what it indicates. There are different spikes, movements, all things that are involved in polygraphs. It's a junk science. I found it comical that he used the term junk science when he's trying to throw cast on the cell phones that clearly show evidence that he doesn't want in, but that then doesn't use junk science on polygraphs. If they aren't junk science, then have his client take one. And the reason that it was put out the way it was is because he even drew a little red line and said, see, when he was asked if he killed him and it went a spike. First of all, that wasn't even a proper representation of the evidence. And also that's not what that spike meant. And so it's incredibly frustrating to only have a whole hearing just so that they can disparage the name of a potential witness, someone that has continued to be used by Alec.
So let me ask you this pretty bluntly. You're telling me your client, Curtis Eddie Smith, had nothing to do with either of the murders that took place on June 7, 2021? Absolutely.
Did not have anything to do with it. And we welcome any DNA testing. He voluntarily gave his DNA at the roadside shooting over a year ago. Our speedy trial is still pending on that. Hasn't been heard, hasn't been set, even though he was arrested a year before these indictments came out. They've had his DNA, and they can gladly test it. It will only help our case.
All right, so obviously, Jen, she's doubling down. There's, test his DNA. Bring it on. They've had his DNA on file for a year.
Since the roadside shooting investigation.
Over a year.
Yeah.
So she's saying, test it. He's innocent. Now, what have we learned about Curtis Eddie Smith in the aftermath of this? Is Amy onto something here?
I've never had a source tell me that Eddie was at Moselle that night. I mean, that I've heard a lot of sources say a lot of different people were there. Eddie's never been one of them that.
Not even rumors.
Mm-mm.
Okay.
No, I mean, I went back and thought about it and looked at all of my notes, and that's never been something that a source has said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when his lawyer doubles down hard like that, what does that tell you?
I think she has a reason to double down. I think she's probably fighting for her client. And
mm-hmm. Well, we have, in the aftermath of that interview, folks, we did reach out to our network of law enforcement sources familiar with the status of this ongoing investigation. They concurred. They concurred with her assessment regarding the lack of involvement of Curtis Eddie Smith in connection with that Moselle homicide. Now, obviously, Curtis Eddie Smith, he's very mixed up with Alec
not
Murdaugh.
necessarily an innocent man, but I don't necessarily think that he's our man at Moselle.
Right. I mean, we've got him with cashing checks for Alec Murdaugh as part of these financial crimes. We've got him dropping drugs at Moselle. And in fact, I want to get into that a little bit because this is part of this investigation that you are very keyed in on. Is it? And Dick Harpootlian, the defense attorney for Alec Murdaugh, at the hearing in Florence, talked about Cousin Eddie making drug drops at Moselle, particularly at the site.
Actually, Creighton mentioned that.
Creighton mentioned that too, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, they both talked about
he's
that.
very familiar. As you know, your client is familiar with Moselle.
Right.
In terms of dropping off drugs.
So walk us through this. Both sides obviously agreeing on this component of it, but you think the drug story is much bigger.
I do think it's...
Tell us a little bit about this.
I mean, since the beginning of this, even Dick said this is very, very much like Ozark. I do think there is a lot of ties to drug trafficking. I mean, we've seen the Barrett Bulware side of things. I mean, he was a alleged drug trafficker, had been arrested for drug trafficking related crimes in the past, all the way down to Eddie and his cowboys. I mean, that's a lot of ties to drugs.
Yeah.
On both sides.
Smuggling, distribution.
Distribution, bringing it in.
And I want to remind our readers, we'll put these in the show notes because these are important stories. Last fall, this news outlet, if you recall, 2 big stories, last September and last October, detailing the connections between Alec Murdaugh and Barrett Bowler, the late Barrett Bowler. He died back in, 2018?
2018, I believe.
But this is a guy who was linked to a lot of drug smuggling activity in the St. Helena area.
A lot of criminal activity.
A lot of criminal activity. They had a lot of properties. Alec Murdaugh owns a lot of properties down there with and from Barrett Bowler. Bowler, I guess, is
He
the
used to own Moselle.
former owner of the site of these murders.
Yep.
A lot of connections there. And again, they were social connections too.
Correct.
Bowler and his wife and Alec and Maggie Murdaugh.
Correct.
Were
They were all
social.
tight. They socialized often, from what I'm told.
But it was Jen Wood's research, folks, that put those stories to the public back in September and October of last year. Jen, where are we with this broader drug investigation?
Oh, I'm still digging. I mean, everybody thinks I'm nuts, but 2 lawyers, a shrimp, deep sea shrimp fisherman open a jellyfish
The jellyfish gambit, that's right.
operation and are tied in with a lot of very interesting international businessmen while doing so. And it still surprises me that nobody has looked at those ties.
And the next connection to that is going to be, who are those international businessmen? Who do they roll and sit with?
Correct.
And sort of making those
And
connections.
I think people will be very surprised.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, give us a little tease. Come on now. And by the way, you are crazy, but I don't think you're crazy about this.
No, anything's possible. But I mean, the ties are very interesting. I'm just going to say.
Are you going to tease us like you teased us with the witness after the Moselle homicide?
Let's just say the owner of one of the companies who is involved or was involved in the jellyfish operation also owns a company in Mexico. That's very questionable. There's a lot of legal filings in California against him for various, I'm trying to remember the exact fraud, civil fraud cases. But he owns a factory in Mexico.
And this guy's connected to the companies at the heart of the Murdaugh.
Yeah, one of them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, there's definitely some things that are, to me, big red flags.
So you're pulling these threads.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and making some progress.
Oh, yeah.
Well, folks, if you followed that story again last fall, it's been one of the, perplexing, frustrating components of this investigation because we know there's something so much bigger than a local Walterboro-based gang, the Cowboys. But the Cowboys are making news this week, aren't they? Tell us a little bit about what you're hearing on the Cowboy front.
There was another major drug arrest in Colleton County. It looks like it was a joint operation between Colleton County and SLED, and was drug trafficking. And in the announcement, there were multiple weapons, an AR and a double-barreled shotgun that were confiscated with the drugs.
Wait a minute, an AR and a double-barrel shotgun? Those are 2 weapons from...
I mean,
You're
probably not tied, but sure is interesting.
you are pulling some threads, Jen Wood.
I'm just keeping an eye on everything. I'm watching.
As we think, though, about these broader potential conspiracies, and again, I think we all agree there's something there, something big there. But as we start trying to nail them down, one of the areas where we had hoped to see some motion was the federal side of this case. Because obviously, for those of you following, there's a state investigation, a multi-layered, multifaceted criminal investigation of financial crimes, of public corruption, of the murders, of Alec Murdaugh's roadside shooting. So there's a ton of state investigations.
And we did recently have state drug trafficking charges with Alex and Eddie in June.
Correct. So there's state drug charges. But where we had really hoped to kind of start getting to the bottom of a lot of this was the federal investigation, because we looked at this, we saw RICO with the fleecings from the law firm and the bank, allegedly, clear predicate crimes where they repeated kind of the same crime over and over in a pattern.
Correct.
But we're not getting that broader conspiracy in the federal investigation, are we, Jen?
No. I keep waiting. I mean, to me, it's there. I mean, these crimes were committed by employees of Palmetto State Bank and PMPED.
You're saying you believe that not just Russell and Alec, not just Russell Lafitte.
We're looking at thefts from client trust funds at a large law firm. I have to imagine that there are people that should be monitoring those client trust accounts.
Who were they?
Who were they?
Why weren't they monitored?
Right. Who was controlling those accounts? Who was responsible for that?
Let's talk a little bit about that federal case, because it was a big week on the federal case as well.
Correct.
As you know, we reported earlier this month, Russell Lafitte, the former chief executive officer of Palmetto State Bank, who's been indicted at the state level and at the federal level for financial crimes, various financial crimes. It was revealed that he made tapes of potentially board meetings, of executive committee meetings.
And not just one tape, right?
According to Eric Bland, a serial taper. Bland knows
I
what
was
he's talking
surprised.
about.
I was kind of impressed. I didn't know Russell had it in him.
Oh, yeah. I mean, to be a patsy, it sounds like he's a smarter patsy than some in history. But these tapes could point to this broader conspiracy that we've talked about. But this week, as we were going to tape this episode, in fact, we found a filing in federal court that said what?
Russell's defense team filed a motion for power to subpoena the firm that was in charge of auditing PMPED's financial records beginning January 1st, 2021.
So that would predate what we know of the start of the state investigation into Alec Murdaugh's financial crimes.
Correct.
Because as we reported earlier this year, that investigation into his financial crimes by the statewide grand jury actually began before these murders.
Correct. In May, I believe, right?
Yeah. Late April of 2021. So what you're saying is that through the federal case, we have learned that this investigation into Alec Murdaugh and his finances, which we know was underway before the Mizell killings.
Correct.
That the firm may have known about that as early as January?
I mean, if they're requesting audit records from January 1st, 2021.
But what's interesting is that the firm claims it did not know anything about Alec Murdaugh's alleged financial scandals until when?
I believe it was September 4th.
Yeah, so
Correct.
early September.
Right after the roadside shooting.
Early September of 2021. So that's like, what, a 9 month
9 months.
differential?
Yeah. First they heard about it, they immediately reported it, according to Hampton Police and SLED.
And what's interesting about this, obviously, we also reported earlier this month, there's a new civil case from a guy in Mexico, incidentally, which accuses other attorneys in Murdaugh's law firm and the firm itself of being an active role in these fleecings, in at least one of them.
Right.
Which is exactly the kind of conspiracy that we were hoping the federal case would unearth.
But, I mean, we're going back to the civil cases are unearthing all this again.
But let me ask you this. The feds, what's their response to this evidence, to the tapes? Do they want to get this out?
No, they just filed a motion today.
Which said what?
They believe that Russell is using the defense that he was advised by counsel, it would be inappropriate in jury nullification.
So the feds are trying to keep the tapes under wraps.
Correct.
That's disappointing.
Yeah.
I mean, they can still prosecute him while letting the tapes out, right?
Right.
Why would they want to suppress the tapes?
It's a really good question. Do you know the answer? I don't.
I tell you, one of the things we've seen from the beginning of this story is there's a school of thought that prosecutors, investigators want to cauterize this, that they want to narrow the scope of this investigation, pin it all on Alec Murdaugh, pin it all on Russell Laffitte.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I am hopeful that both state and federal prosecutors are serious about getting to the bottom of this. In fact, SLED Chief Mark Keel, if you remember very early in this investigation, said no stone will be left unturned, that they will follow justice wherever it leads, or they will follow the facts wherever they lead in pursuit of justice. Do you believe that at the federal level?
I have a lot of concerns. I am still surprised Russell is the only person indicted at the federal level.
Now, do you believe that at the state level, though? Do you trust SLED? Maybe handling, but
I'm ready to see discovery. I would like to see some discovery before I can say I trust them.
Mm-hmm.
I do trust them more than I do right now, given what I know of the federal investigation.
Right. So but there's two questions. There's, do we trust them intention-wise?
Mm-hmm.
Do we trust them competency-wise? What are your thoughts on state and federal investigators as it relates to those questions?
State, I definitely trust them, both intention and competency. I feel like they are trying to do the right thing and getting the truth out there and solving the crimes. But I haven't seen enough from the federal, but what I've seen is concerning.
Mm-hmm. And when we say concerning, we're talking about some of the conflicts of interest.
Mm-hmm. A lot of conflicts of interest.
Mm-hmm. And FITSNews, again, reported last fall on some of those conflicts. We've got an attorney in the U.S. Attorney's Office there in Charleston who is the daughter of one of Alec Murdaugh's law partners. We got another attorney there who was actually Murdaugh's lawyer in one of the civil cases.
Correct.
Those are two pretty
tight connections.
And also, let's not forget that this attorney in the U.S. Attorney's Office was working with Murdaugh in the 14th Judicial Circuit down there under Solicitor Duffy Stone.
Yep.
Who again is a shady character in this entire saga. Failed to recuse himself for weeks after that, months after that double homicide.
Right, the homicide occurred June 7th, and he didn't recuse himself till August, I believe, right?
That's correct, August 11th. And in fact, his failure to do that has complicated this investigation. In fact, we saw in some of the filings from the defense attorneys, they're pointing to evidence handled
by his team.
Yeah.
The Maggie's cell phone specifically.
Could have really messed this investigation up, couldn't he? Mm-hmm. And again, the reason for that, obviously, Alec Murdaugh, 3 generations of his family served as the solicitor in the 14th Circuit down there in the South Carolina Low Country. Murdaugh himself a badge-carrying member of that office.
Correct.
At the time of the killings. Mm-hmm. And at the time of all these related financial crimes. Jen, this story has been like, I think I described it earlier this week as a single color jigsaw puzzle, 5,000 pieces that people are trying to put together in the middle of a Category 5 hurricane. But are we starting now, at long last, to see some of the outlines?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah, absolutely.
And some of those, obviously, the timeline.
The timeline was a big deal. They did mention, I think it was Alex's defense team mentioned that Paul's phone was off at the time of the homicides. Mm-hmm. Maggie's phone was found a quarter of a mile away. That was new information.
Now, there is one segment of this hearing I want to cut to real quick, though, and it involves Attorney Dick Harpootlian discussing some of the gunshot residue. He made some interesting points, particularly, well, in fact, let's let Dick Harpootlian make that point right now about the gunshot residue.
The same thing on these GSR results. There are 3 particles, according to the SLED report. We've got our own GSR expert, 3 particles. We don't have the bench notes. We don't have those 3 particles are consistent, according to their expert, with him going and getting a gun from the house after he finds the bodies. And their expert and our expert on crime scene indicate whoever shot Paul would be covered in GSR, covered in blood, and there's no evidence whatsoever of that for Mr. Murdaugh.
All right, so Jen, Attorney Harpootlian, we just heard him. That's a pretty compelling argument, right? He's saying, listen, if my guy fired 2 shotgun blasts point blank, he'd be coated in blood, coated in GSR. Your thoughts?
He's right. He would be.
Now, does that lead us to the potential importance of this witness that you've spoken of?
I think that might be a very interesting point, and probably why the state pointed back to the timeline.
And where he went, which is, again, incidentally, where
Correct.
they were searching
Right.
in August. But the fact that they were still searching, does that mean that they don't have some of this key evidence?
To my knowledge, they don't have either of the weapons, correct?
Well, not just the weapons, but potentially clothing that may have been
Clothing
disposed
discarded.
of.
Perhaps he had gloves on. I mean,
So if they haven't found these key pieces of evidence, does that work? I mean, obviously it works in the defense's favor, but
no. I mean, it depends on what they do have.
what they do have.
Yeah.
Because they obviously have been sort of holding back a little
Right.
bit.
Right.
For example, I mean, we knew nothing about the timeline until the defense attorneys challenged them on it.
Right. I mean, will the experts say that the lack of significant gunshot residue on his hands could have been due to him wearing gloves? Is the gunshot residue consistent with the murder weapons? Or, there's a lot of questions that you would have about the evidence. But
And we were told this week, and again, this is very significant, we were told this week by one of our most trusted law enforcement sources that we have not seen even the beginning of the forensic evidence in this case, and that the forensic evidence in this case, according, again, to these sources that we've spoken with, damning. And we knew a lot about this leading up to it, the high-velocity impact spatter. We obviously knew about the video evidence. And again, one of the other things from this hearing that we heard a lot about was the geofencing.
yes,
And we're still apparently waiting on some of that data from Google.
they mentioned one geofence warrant that they were still waiting to get back. I don't know if that would be the only one that was submitted or if it was a new one that they submitted in the course of the investigation. I do know that geofence warrants do take time. They require significant negotiation because Google tries to limit the scope of it as much as possible to protect their user data. So Google,
Which is good.
Right, it's great. So they do take longer. Google will go back and forth with the court in terms of the subpoena.
Now, is there concern that if the delay in getting this geofencing data is too pronounced, that could possibly push this January 23rd court date back?
January 23rd is coming up fast.
It is. That was a point
Right.
repeatedly made by the defense attorneys for Alec Murdaugh during the hearing on Thursday.
Right. I mean, but they wanted the hearing in November initially, correct?
That's true.
And state said that they couldn't accommodate that with court scheduling. So
Tons of huge development, folks. A massive week on the Murdaugh front. Jen Wood, thank you for coming in, filling us in on this. Your research has been at the heart of this story from the beginning, so thank you. We'll be back with much more on the Murdaugh murders, crime, and corruption saga. All right, one other bit of news on the Murdaugh murders, crime, and corruption front that I think is very important. For months, people have been asking, how is Alec Murdaugh paying for his attorneys, these two high-priced, high-powered, high-profile lawyers, Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin? How's he paying for them? We got an answer, or part of an answer, this week. According to a filing in conjunction with the civil case, one of these civil cases, the court-appointed receivers for Alec Murdaugh's assets have agreed to a deal in which Alec Murdaugh's 401k has been divested. Now, let's walk through the numbers here. This matters. $1.7 million roughly was the total amount available. Now, obviously, when you liquidate that, you got to pay taxes. You got to pay fees for early withdrawals. So not all that money was available to Murdaugh. The total available, $892,000, according to the filing that was submitted this week in South Carolina court. Now, of that money, $600,000 is going to go to Murdaugh's attorneys, and apparently there is not much anyone can do about that. 401k, much more difficult to get at than other assets because, again, it's not just money that the employee put into it, it's money the employer put into it. A lot of strings, a lot of complications that involve trying to get at that money. So $600,000 of that money going to Murdaugh's attorneys, $292,000 will go to the qualified settlement, which again is going to be the money that's available for the many, many victims of Alec Murdaugh's alleged financial crimes. So that's a quick update on how Alec Murdaugh is paying for at least part of his legal defense, which, as we found out this week, is going to involve a ton of expert witnesses, trying to get him out of this jam that he's found himself in as it relates to these 2 murder charges. So just that one quick update on the Murdaugh murders, crime, and corruption front as we look forward to another huge week in connection with that saga. All right, so some news before we go on the South Carolina front. Earlier this week, FITSNews reported that the Palmetto State was in the running for a pair of electric vehicle battery and component facilities, and shortly after our report was published, it was confirmed. The Charleston Post and Courier filed a report shortly after ours indicating that one of those facilities, a battery facility in Florence, South Carolina, would bring about 2,000 jobs to the PD region of the state. Now, I do want to point out, FITSNews, when we cover these stories, we talk about the fact that, hey, these jobs have a cost. When you have to pay jobs to come here, guess what, people? Somebody's got to pay for the jobs, right? Usually that is small businesses, individual income earners, sole proprietorships, people like you and me trying to make a living with our small businesses. Again, somebody's got to pay for it. But this is big political news because it's going to benefit incumbent Governor Henry McMaster. Now, McMaster already well ahead in the polls over his Democratic rival, Joe Cunningham. This race really hasn't been close from the beginning, and Cunningham kind of screwed it for himself by pissing off old people, black people, pretty much all the key voting demographics for a Democrat running for office here in the Palmetto State. So this race wasn't close, but McMaster, with this announcement of new jobs coming to the PD region of the state, that's going to significantly enhance his electoral prospects, probably bump him maybe even to the 10-point range, could win this election by 10 percentage points, folks. Again, it's going to be a Republican route in 2022, very similar to the Republican route that we saw back in 2020, which delivered supermajorities to Republicans in the House and the Senate, literally 1 or 2 votes away from 2/3 majorities in both of these chambers. Now, what are Republicans doing with this power? I'm glad you asked. Basically the same thing that Democrats did with this power when they had it back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Again, pouring more of your money into the same failed bureaucracies, people. And again, that has produced terrible economic results, terrible academic results, terrible infrastructure, terrible public safety. Again, we've seen huge spikes in violent crime, folks, thanks to the way that Palmetto State lawmakers have elected the same judges turning criminals back on the streets. And again, my point would simply be this: as you go to the polls this coming November the 8th, as you go to cast your vote, first of all, think about those issues. But more importantly, I want you to think about this. Think about why you don't have a real choice at the ballot box. This isn't the Matrix, people, red pill, blue pill, where there's an actual difference. You take the red pill or the blue pill in South Carolina, you're going to get the same thing, which is more of the same failure. And at FITSNews, that is what we are committed to fighting. We're committed to holding both parties accountable, not for the rhetoric that they throw, not for the sayings, the political slogans they tout, but for the results that they produce, or more often is the case in South Carolina, the results they fail to produce. Count on FITSNews to continue to hold them accountable for that failure. All right, that's a wrap for this week's edition of the Week in Review. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Obviously, a ton of Murdaugh news this week. We didn't get into Cheer Incorporated as much as I would like, but guess what? We've got a lot of Cheer Incorporated news this coming week, including not 1, but 2 exclusive interviews, which are going to dive deeper into the saga, hearing from people directly impacted. Stay tuned for that and much more on future editions. I'd also like to remind you, if you haven't listened to it yet, Cheer Incorporated, our podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you download podcasts. Check it out. You're going to hear those interviews not only on FITSNews, but exclusively on Cheer Incorporated. So please give it a listen, give it a like, give it a review, and share it with your friends if you like it. That's a wrap. We'll catch you next time on the Week in Review.